Coming up, the Space Launch System.
And pretty pictures of Earth.
Plus, we're going to be talking about rocket reusability and why it matters more than just reducing the cost of spaceflight. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins right now. And welcome to Tomorrow for Saturday, October 24th, 2015. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham. And we'll be your hosts for this episode. No Space Mike this particular week. Now, before we get started with some space news, I did want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are the people who've contributed $10 or more to this show. And you can find out more information on how you can help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some space news. It is actually, in all fairness, a fairly light space news week.
Yeah, ironically.
But it's like light. There aren't a lot of stories, but the stories that did come out are kind of a big deal. So let's start out with, speaking of big, the Space Launch System. So here is an artist rendition of the Space Launch System. You'll actually notice it changed a little bit. That's because its design review has been completed. And that design review milestone clears the way for engineers to start full-scale fabrication of the entire Space Launch System. Now, of that, you may have noticed that we've previously said, oh, such and such part was being built, or they're working on such and such a thing for Space Launch System. That's because many of the components are, in fact, already being built and have already been started that building process. What you're looking at there, that's a 20-story core stage of the Space Launch System in the middle, that orange section. You're also noting that it's orange now, just like the old Space Shuttle external tank, right? Mm-hmm. They did, in the final review, they're like, all right, dude, do we really need to paint this thing? Because if you remember, right, back in the, and actually I think we have a second picture as well. Yeah, there you go. So there it is on the crawler transporter.
It looks kind of badass.
Yeah, it does look kind of awesome. Now, back in the day, the very first two space shuttle flights, the external tank was actually painted white. And then they determined, oh, we don't need to paint it white. Well, before we ever flew Space Launch System, they determined, we don't need to paint it white. That's going to save them about, right? It's going to save them about 1,000 pounds or so. And that's extra payload that they'll then be able to get going up into space. So that illustration that you saw, okay, sorry, Dada, go back. Illustration you see, it was, in all fairness, that was a good cut point.
It was
If
awesome.
I wasn't about to say that,
as you can see here.
As you can see.
You are the destroyer of all segues.
Yes.
So it's only fair.
As you can see on the solid rocket boosters, they kind of have that new paint job. This is actually a really great photo because the other one you can't really see it as well. So the solid rocket motors on either side, they kind of have that swooping paint.
Yeah, the orange, white, gray kind of stuff.
Yeah, that looks cool and is not finalized. So maybe that will happen. Maybe it won't happen. Don't know. So the NASA officials said they're still deciding whether they're going to add the paint job on the finished product. I hope they do. I think it looks pretty cool, and I hope they do something, whether it's that paint job or a paint job, something that makes it look distinctly just awesome.
Our chat room is sort of 50-50 on that one.
Yeah.
Some of them like the old way, some of them like the new way.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, there is something beautiful and elegant about just the pure white boosters.
Sure.
I think it looked cooler with them painting the orange foam, kind of a. It's actually more of a green foam that turns orange in sunlight. I thought it looked cooler white with like that old kind of Saturn V look. I thought that was way more awesome. But 1,000 pounds is 1,000 pounds.
There was somebody that compared that camera. There was somebody that compared that paint job to the Moonraker paint job that the space shuttle got in the Bond film.
Oh.
And showed an image of it, and it was actually pretty close. It was kind of humorous.
That's cool.
Interesting.
Or funny, I suppose. All right, so
art imitates life, and life imitates art. That's just the way it goes.
The vehicle is about 321 feet tall. The Block 1, which is what we're going to be launching in November 2018-ish, that's going to be able to take 77 tons, which is 70 metric tons, up to low Earth orbit. If you combine Earth and orbit, you get Orth. So low Earth.
Low Earth.
You're welcome, Internet. The first mission in November 2018 will be taking the uncrewed Orion module around the moon, actually. So that will be kind of a neat little mission, going back around the moon and heading back home. And then after that, that's Exploration Mission 1. Exploration Mission 2, after that, a couple years later, will actually have a crew. So Space Launch System is done. It is no longer just a paper rocket. They are building the thing, which means Dave Maston is about to owe me $1. Was it $1 or a steak dinner? Does anyone remember?
$1.
It was $1. Dave Maston is about to owe me $1.
Well, if Dave loses, he's definitely going to say it was $1.
I don't know. You might want a steak dinner. I don't know.
Well, I suppose.
Or what we'll do is we'll just go out and get a steak dinner. We'll split it, and he'll put an extra $1 into the tip. That's what we'll do.
That'll work. Oh, goodness.
Speaking of NASA.
So, yes, more NASA news. That's a great segue there. That was awesome. More NASA news. NASA is releasing pictures of Earth, which sounds really boring, but it's really, really cool. Here, take a look. What's going on is this is from the Discover, or Deep Space Climate Observatory satellite that was a conjunction of NASA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the U.S. Air Force, and this launched aboard the SpaceX Falcon 9 in February 11th, 2015. And these are pictures that we're getting, which they're coming in every single day now, which is really cool. NASA's going to be releasing a bunch of images every day, like I said, that were anywhere between 12 and 36 hours old. So they're fresh, hot off the presses, if you will. The Discover satellite is about 1 million miles away, which sounds like an exaggeration, but that's really where it is, which I thought was kind of funny. And it's using, I have to read this, it's using what they're calling an EPIC camera, which is also an acronym of Earth Polychromatic Imaging Camera.
Which is confusing because there's a red camera called
Epic.
Nope.
There we go. There we go. We've moved on to.
That's it. We're done with that story now.
No more Earth. Da-da.
Yep, there it is.
So what the camera does is it's a 4 megapixel CCD camera and telescope. I didn't write down what CCD was, but it takes color photos in 3 separate single color images. So that when you combine them, you've got the equivalent of a 12 megapixel image. And the effective resolution is anywhere between 10 and 15 kilometers. That's how small they can get down to, or how detailed they are. And if you want to see these pictures, if you're interested in these pictures or going back to the archive of any of the pictures that they've been taking, you can hit up epic.gsfc.nasa.gov. And you can see all of them, and they're really quite fantastic.
I don't remember what the CCD actually stands for.
I don't either, and I apologize I didn't write it down.
It's a type of sensor on a camera. You
Okay.
have fundamentally 2 types of sensor. One is CCD and one is CMOS.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that I know what each acronym stands for, but I've used the acronym for so long, I don't actually know what it means.
Now. Yay.
I know the differences between the two, but I don't know what each one means. It is a little interesting that they used a CCD as opposed to a CMOS sensor, because CMOS tends to fare better in space with radiation.
Yo no say. They didn't ask
That can
me.
all be shielded, so there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Speaking of NASA, Orbital ATK is ramping up their booster production for the Space Launch System. Now, this is what you saw earlier, destroying the Earth, is actually one of the solid motor tests. That's kind of what it looked like, right? There was an Earth, and all of a sudden this giant flame coming.
Yes.
So this is a solid motor test. Keep the audio really low on this. I'll just talk over it. So this was one of the 5-segment solid rocket boosters that's going on the Space Launch System. This is slightly increased from the 4-segment solid rocket. Well, not slightly increased. It is very increased from the 4-segment solid rocket motors that were on the Space Shuttle. Now, to give you an idea of how much this has increased, each one of these solid rocket boosters will weigh 1.6 million pounds and will give off 3.6 million pounds of thrust at sea level per, which means that combined, these 2 solid motors will actually give us 400,000 pounds more thrust than the entire Space Shuttle system, which was the 2 motors themselves, plus the 3 main shuttle engines themselves.
Right.
So just these 2 motors are more powerful than the entire Space Shuttle was. And these are, of the thrust for the Space Launch System, this provides about 75% of it on the first 2 minutes of flight. So yeah, these things are awesome. They're 177 feet tall and 12 feet in diameter. To give you an idea as to how large that is, there's a booster. Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
Cool, right? I didn't realize that they were like that. I mean, I knew they were big, but you just don't get a concept of scale in any of the pictures. I think that helps a little bit because what you're looking at is they're applying a coating on the inside of one of the solid rocket boosters. This is one of those 5-segment solid rocket boosters that they're putting up. Obviously, there's no fuel in it right now. They're just applying it to one of the test motors. This is going to feature a new nozzle design. That accounts for the increased performance. It has new avionics and a new non-destructive test evaluation before it actually leaves their plant in ATK's in Utah. Utah. Yes. One couple other big changes. These are single-use now. So before, it used to be that we would take the solid motor. It was 4-segment solid motor. They'd attach from the space shuttle. We'd dump them in the ocean. We'd get some ships. We'd go out. We'd recover them, put them back on the ship, refurbish the whole thing, put fuel back in it, put it back on the rocket, and off you go. And that process, in fact, costs more than actually just building a new one. And in fact, with the Space Launch System's low launch rate of once every 3 years, they were like...
They just don't care?
They're like, this does not make sense to do. We're just going to build a new one. So that's what they're going to do. Additionally, for the Block 2 Space Launch System, which will be even more powerful than Block 1, they're coming up with some modifications to it to give even more power, less overall weight, and just be more badass in general. So production of those motors has already started for that Exploration Mission 1 test flight coming up in November of 2018. So rock on, Orbital ATK.
Still want jewelry made from the glass from the sand that the fire was on.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. Oh yeah, because when you fire a solid rocket motor sideways, like you saw, it basically will melt the sand underneath it into glass, and that's what they have. They have like this glass shards underneath there. That would be very cool to have some solid rocket motor jewelry made from that glass. So, if anyone from Orbital ATK is watching, Carrie Ann would like some solid rocket motor glass, please. There you go. All right. And finally,
speaking of not NASA.
Speaking of not NASA? No, that's not.
I don't know.
There's no segue for this one.
There really isn't. And I just happen to love the title of this one, which is Snooze Your Way to Mars. So, last week or the week before...
Well, all that solid rocket motor glass, wouldn't that make a nice warm glass of milk? That's what you have for before bedtime, right?
Oh, I see what you're doing. You make... I see how you're trying to... No. So you're saying you make a glass that holds the milk.
Right.
That is a way complicated segue, Dada. It is not worth the effort. All right. So, snoozing our way to Mars.
Well.
At the International Aerospace Conference in Israel 2015, which was, I believe, last week. If it wasn't last week, it was the week before. There was an interesting presentation. There were a lot of many interesting presentations, but this one sort of caught my ear, eye, nose, and throat. They didn't call it Snooze Your Way to Mars, but it's a company called SpaceWorks, if I remember correctly. Yes, good. I wrote it down correctly. That said they think that the best way to get a human colony to Mars is to put them in a stasis. That's really what it comes down to.
Well, you don't consume as much.
Right.
Nearly as much, right?
It's called torpor, Torpor, and it's a hibernation state for those of you stasis. The idea being that, exactly as you're saying, that people in stasis are not consuming as much. They're not. You don't have to worry about. It reduces the amount of food and water and oxygen needed, which reduces the amount of weight needed. You can go from a regular crew of 100 needing about 700 tons, I can't speak, to get to Mars. But in the same amount of time, in the SpaceWorks way, you can take 100 crew and reduce that to 200 tons. This is a really kind of a cool visual. So one pod, out of 100 crew, you would have 96 people in stasis and 4 people who are essentially the caretakers. So the pod all the way to the one side is sort of the pod that or the caretaker's pod. And it might be hard for you to see, but there's only like 4 people in there, and it looks like they've got plenty of room to sort of move around and do whatever it is that they need to do. The next pod over, you can see the little cross section there is bunch of little people in stasis, which is still kind of creepy. It reminds me of the Matrix a little bit. And then the next pod is just more people in stasis.
I figured
That's
the
really
pod
what it
bay
comes down
doors
to.
were the ones kind of in the middle. Those are the doors that Hal would open.
Wow. So the torpor hibernation state is characterized by decreased physiological activity and reduced metabolic rates. So they're lowering the temperature, the patient's body temperature, in order to induce the torpor. And then there's a medical treatment that the way they are fed is essentially the way that babies get fed. It's intravenous and nutritional fluids. So
Tasty.
well, but the thing is that you don't have to go through digestion. You don't have to. Then you're not producing any waste. You're just your body's automatically getting everything that it needs and only as much as it needs. So you don't have to worry about any of that part of it.
Would it be a good diet program too? Would they be able to? Maybe.
Yeah, but you have to be in the hibernation state in order to take it in the correct way. If that makes any sense. Because if you're expending more, then it doesn't matter. Anyhow, it was a really interesting idea, and I thought it was kind of a cool presentation, and it's available online. We actually got the links through parabolicarc.com, but they're available. They're out there. Spaceworks, and I don't know. I thought it was really cool. It was an interesting way of looking at it, and sort of an easy way of transporting 100 people to Mars, but much not faster, but much with much less effort, I guess.
Before we go to break, there was a question from Mind Cozy. It asked, this is regarding the solid rocket motors from Orbital ATK. Are the solid rocket motors non-recoverable because they make it higher out of the atmosphere? No, they're non-recoverable because they decided to not make them recoverable, ultimately. It saves about 9,000 pounds in the recovery, removing all the recovery stuff. You don't need the parachutes or the avionics and all the pyro stuff. So that just means that they have, it's lighter so they can lift more up into space. So. And it's very, very expensive to make something like that hits saltwater recoverable. Now, if they landed it back on land, it'd be a different story. And speaking of, we're going to talk about recoverability efforts and some of these next generation vehicles that are designed to be flown more than once in the next segment of our show. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled on some expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving, 'cause her heat keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
And welcome back to Tomorrow. Now, before we get into our main topic of recovering rockets, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all the producers of Tomorrow who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These people have contributed $5 or more to this specific show. If you'd like to find out how you can help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. And a huge thank you to all of our supporters for making this happen, because we couldn't do this without you week after week. And one of the neat, harping on that even more, one of the really neat things about the Patreon stuff that we do is that if we don't do a show, you don't pay, right? It's per episode. So if we're off for 2 weeks, you're not paying for 2 weeks in which we're not doing anything. Or not doing anything, right? So it's a very fair system. And if you don't think that it's worth $5 or $2 or $1, you contribute whatever value you think it is worth, and then you can set a maximum value. So don't spend more than $10 per month or whatever that number is for you. Whatever you think this show is worth and what you think it is viable in your world. I don't know what.
Or as a coworker said, whatever you think, whatever value you put on seeing your name in those different segments.
Yes, and how many times? How many times, right? The more you put in, the more
the more times you see your name.
More times you see your name in the side of the show. Absolutely. You get other things too, but that's the big one. That's the big one. All right, let's go ahead. So, wanted to talk about reusability.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people realize that there is reusability going on, and you think SpaceX, right, initially,
Yeah.
but I created a really quick list here. It's not just SpaceX, right? You've got, these are the companies that are working on reusable rockets or reusable spacecraft in some form or another. We've got SpaceX, Blue Origin, Masten Space Systems, who's kind of like the de facto standard of reusability right now, United Launch Alliance, Ariane Space, kinda, someday maybe, Strato Launch, X-Core Aerospace, Virgin Galactic, Reaction Engines, Firefly Space, Dutto, I forgot at least one. Who did I forget here?
Airbus.
Airbus, right? They're working on some stuff. And that's what's active right now. There were programs like the DCX and other past programs that were kind of doing some of the reusability kind of things. And I guess the point of this particular episode is to talk about not just who's doing what. I mean, everyone kind of have a general idea of that. It's not the specific technology, it's the why reusability is important. And we can kind of break this into, I think, two different areas. The first is bringing the cost of space down. And we look at the space shuttle, and the space shuttle was reusable. I actually reference it not as reusable, but refurbishable. The space shuttle was supposed to bring the cost of space down from the Apollo era, which was, someone refresh my memory, Apollo was 500 pounds, $500 per pound to low Earth orbit. Is that correct? And something like that. I'm sure the chat room will know. It was a fairly low number. The space shuttle more than doubled that, and it was supposed to reduce it. Well, here's what happened. They were never able to fly at the rate that they thought they were going to fly.
Right.
The design got tweaked when the Department of Defense kind of got their hands in it, and like what it needed to do changed. And it wasn't really reusable. It was refurbishable in that every heat tile had to be checked.
Right.
The engines basically had to be disassembled, checked, and reassembled between flights. You had to do these 9 million point inspections throughout the entire vehicle. And it was just too complex of a machine to actually make it fully, truly reusable.
Right.
The companies I mentioned, for the most part, there were a few exceptions in that list, but most of the companies are not working towards refurbishability. They're working towards reusability in that they're trying to do what Mastin does today. Everyone wants to do what Mastin's doing today, which is you take it, you fuel it up, you fly it, you land it, you fuel it up, you fly it, you land it, you fuel it up, you fly it, you land it. You don't do it
Right.
I mean, I think he does that like in one day.
Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Express
Yeah,
Challenge.
just up, down, over, up, down, right? Just up, down,
Yeah.
down. That's what companies are striving towards. Because if you can do that, now it's more like an airliner. Now it's more like a space plane, essentially, or space airliner. A plane is bad because it could be vertical landing.
Right.
And in doing that, instead of taking this $100 million vehicle and dumping it in the
You're
ocean.
saving time. You're saving money. You're saving time across the board. You're saving time in how fast you can, get up and be flying again.
Sure.
Because if you just have to do a couple of spot checks, much like an airplane, for instance, you just have to do a couple of spot checks, you make sure it's good, and then you just continue on. And then you don't have to go through and check every single little thing. You don't have to employ more people to check every single little thing. You don't have to have systems that have to check every single little thing. And then if you do have an issue, you can just deal with that one little issue as opposed to having to take the entire thing apart, go through, double check absolutely. Yes, it's just like it's this compound issue of time and money saved. It just makes sense, really.
So that's phase one, part one,
Right.
Of like why you want to do it. It will reduce the cost of space. Now there are a few engineers actually from some of these companies that are working on it that don't think that you can really fully do reusability. That the savings, because you take a hit in doing this, right? Because you have to bring fuel up that you're going to use to come back, which is payload that you can't bring up with you. And then you're taking extreme stresses, right? We like it to an airplane, but the stresses that these vehicles are taking are far greater than what an airplane is going to
Right,
undergo.
for sure.
So it is actually far more complex than something like airline travel. So there are some companies that say, this may not be possible, but I'm in the camp of, this is possible, / look at Dave. But then there's the second side of this, which isn't, so what we just talked about, that's talked about a lot. I think that's generally known. But what a lot of people seem to be forgetting, even in the aerospace industry, even in our kind of market, is that we need this if we're going to be going to Mars.
Okay, why?
Right. So right now, how do you land on Mars? You use a sky crane.
Sure, sky
Right.
crane
You
or
use that-
the bouncy ball thing.
The big bouncy ball thing.
Yeah,
right?
I like that one.
Right.
Impact crater.
Or an impact crater. That's 50% of the time or so we make an
Right.
impact crater. Absolutely. So that works great for things that are about those sizes, which is going to be an itty bitty car like a VW Bug or smaller.
Right, a Mini Cooper.
Mini Cooper, that was it. Mini Cooper or smaller.
Sure.
The old Mini Coopers.
The old mini, sure. But what
Smart
happens?
cars.
What
Yes.
happens when you want to send a human?
You send one human.
Not in something that small. There's not
No.
going to be enough life support. Exactly. You don't have the mass. You don't have the landing capability to send a human down to Mars.
Okay.
We need to do propulsive landing. Well, propulsive landing is basically the same thing as reusability, right?
Sure.
So when you're taking these rockets, flipping them around and bringing them back down in the atmosphere, you're essentially learning how to land on Mars. So Dave Maston has a vehicle today that could potentially go to the moon and land on the moon.
Yeah.
He has a vehicle that could go to Mars and land on Mars. And he has all the autonomous stuff that allows you to go anywhere he needs to go in the universe and land on most surfaces, as long as it's a solid surface, right?
That's fair.
Right? So, I mean, there are a few. Venus, questionable. I mean, he could probably land. He could land, whether I'm
And
not
then
sure.
melt
And
immediately?
then immediately like get crushed / melty. But you know, the point is still there. The point is still
Sure.
a valid point. And so, as we're looking to extend our legs in the solar system, this is going to be a technology that is necessary. And so, this is where the propulsive landing stuff is kind of important. What you got from the chat room?
Somebody they were making a joke, but it is an interesting idea. They said we send Felix Baumgartner, which, if those of you who were paying attention, it was Red Bull, right, where
Yeah.
he came down, sort of.
Launched from the edge of space. It wasn't the edge of space.
Right. So that's what we'll do. We'll do these flybys of Mars, and we'll just push everyone out.
Go,
Right.
go!
And they skydive / parachute down. No
Well,
problem.
Also, whatever parachute he uses will only slow him down to about 1,000 miles an hour.
That's
so-
another valid point. Parachutes
That's
don't
true.
work either.
Yeah.
Because the atmosphere is, I mean, the size of the parachute would be so large. There are other technologies being developed which you can use in conjunction with propulsive landing. But ultimately, what we're going to be landing humans on Mars with will be propulsive landing. And that's the Low Density Supersonic Accelerator, LSDS. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Low Density LDSD.
LDSD.
LDSD,
Yeah.
there you go. The low density, that, which is basically a balloon that inflates and increases the surface area of the vehicle so that there's more atmosphere that can press against it. But again, the atmosphere on Mars is so thin and wispy that it helps, but it doesn't help as much as we need to actually land humans on Mars. And that's the second big thing with reusability, is that we need these technologies if we're going to be landing humans on Mars. And so you can look at some of these companies and actually see, what the technology they're developing today is and where they're going to go with it and how they can extrapolate that into future landing sites. And you can also see other companies where you look at that and you go, well, like Stratolaunch. I mean, it's neat, it's reusable, and that will reduce the cost of space, maybe, I think, pretty sure. It'll be reusable for the most part.
Okay.
But that's it, right? It doesn't propulsively land, really. I mean, it lands like an airplane. So, yeah, but you can definitely look at, again, a company like Maston Space Systems, and you can see, they are developing the technologies now. It's not just the propulsive landing, but also the autonomous landing. It's like a Tesla in a rocket, where autopilot V1, where you have to push back on the little stick twice, go bing bing, and the vehicle starts to automatically land itself.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it would be kind of. It's like I don't see the lane anymore. So, sorry, Tesla joke. So yeah, where it'll be able to land itself and kind of go from there. So that's the main topic is.
That's why it's important.
That's why it's important.
Because we need to get off this planet.
Because we do need to get off this planet and make all
Hurricane
that stuff
Patricia
go.
much.
And actually, the other part of it, right? So looking at some of these vehicles again, we have.
Someone, Helda says, fill valves Marinus with Jello and just aim well. Wicked suggested a gigantic net, and that
A
should
good
solve.
net, that'd
should
be
solve
good. It's got to be
everything.
really springy, like a trampoline.
Yes.
Oh, we could take that. Wasn't there like a ULA trampoline joke?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Right, you could take that trampoline. Oh no, was it
Dmitry
Roscosmos?
Rogozin
wasn't-
from
it wasn't ULA.
Roscosmos said that NASA's going to need a trampoline in order to be able to get to space because
Yeah. So we'll take NASA's trampoline, we'll move it to Mars,
No problem.
and that's how we'll land. We'll
There
just
you go.
boink, boink. So there you have it.
Interesting.
So those were the companies. So we've got SpaceX. They're working on vertical takeoff, vertical landing. Blue Origin. They're like, they're just kind of out of nowhere, right? They came out of nowhere. Also working on vertical takeoff, vertical landing, very slowly. Maston Space Systems has vertical takeoff, vertical landing, autonomous flying. At this point, he's working on that DARPA contract where it's going to be rapid reusability into low Earth orbit, so kind of that next step forward. And then from there, you can kind of see where all those pieces go together, and you go, oh, he's pretty far along. You got United Launch Alliance. Reusability kind of right? They're gonna jettison their the power plant, the engines, and then they're gonna take a helicopter of unknown origin, come by, swoop, and pick up the engines and drop the engines into a new vehicle. So that's not gonna help you really for Mars landing or anything else other than Earth, but it does certainly help maybe reduce the cost of Earth, assuming they can find a helicopter that'll work.
Sure.
Ariane Space. Same kind of general concept of jettisoning things. Oh no, wait, no, Dada, what did they move to?
It flies down by itself.
That's right. It needs a landing.
Yes.
Like it's a vertical takeoff, horizontal landing. So that really won't work on Mars either. Stratolaunch, giant airplane, not really going to work on Mars. X-Core, also horizontal landing. So that may not work on Mars very well, but they might be able to do something cool in like a future design where it kind of does something. Virgin Galactic, it's a smaller version of Stratolaunch. So, yep. Reaction engines. That one's not getting us to Mars, but that one's interesting. They are building essentially a jet engine. I don't want to call it a jet. They're building a reaction engine that you stick on essentially an airplane that can go all the way to space. It is a single orbit to space airplane.
Single stage to orbit.
Single stage to orbit. What did I say? Single orbit to space?
To space, yes.
That doesn't make any sense. Single stage to orbit space plane.
Yes.
And you get up to, it's a plane. It's like, you remember back in like, not that any of us remember, you remember back in the 60s though?
Right.
Like the TWA Spaceliner like airplane thing that would go up?
Right.
It's that, but for real. So that would be pretty cool. That won't get you to Mars, but it can get you to the flying. So all of these, well, eventually if they size them up, but that gets you to the, like a space station orbiting Earth, where you then take your ticket to get to Mars. So that's where helps you there. And Firefly Space, let's not forget about them. Also working on stage recoverability.
Nice.
Yep. So really cool stuff.
It was Victor J in the chat room, and then Lassie H who agreed with Victor, saying you could just poke a hole in your spacesuit and fly like Iron Man.
I'm gonna fly like Iron Man. That is a reference to The Martian, for anyone who didn't get that. So yeah. All right,
was funny.
That's our main topic this week. Why reusability is important, especially if we want to get to Mars. We need reusability so we can learn those lessons here on Earth before we go to Mars to try to figure out how we're going to land over there. If you have any comments, I know that I didn't even talk about DCX, which was an old school reusability program. I'd love to know your comments. What reusability programs am I forgetting that are active today? Because I know I've missed some. And what are some of the reusability programs that we tried yesterday that haven't actually either made it off the drawing board, or maybe they made it to a flight stage like a DCX, but then we kind of canceled the program. And then what are your thoughts? What are some other uses for reusability that we're not thinking of that really make a ton more sense than taking the vehicle and throwing it in the ocean every time? Leave your comments on Facebook, leave them on YouTube, on Twitter, wherever you want. We always love hearing from you. And speaking of comments, we're going to be talking about comments from last week's show when we come back. Hi, welcome back to the show. We were ready to come
totally
back.
ready.
We were ready. We were totally ready. We were totally ready.
I don't know what's going on.
Now, before we get into, see, the best part is, had we not said anything, no one would have been like,
know.
oh, there's just an extra second of black.
We were ready.
Yeah, no, we were ready.
Da-da!
Dada! Blame Dada for that. Before we get into the comments from last week's show, I did want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are the people who've contributed $2.50 or more to this specific episode. And by contributing $2.50 or more, you get your name in the show, plus you're going to get access to After Dark as soon as it is available. Oh, but wait, there's more. If you can't afford or don't think the show's worth $2.50, you can contribute as little as 1 penny to the show, and that gets your name of the show. So thank you to everyone here who has contributed to the show to help make this happen week after week. You can find out more information on how you can crowdfund the shows of tomorrow over at patreon.com/TMRO. And I wonder how many more times I can say show.
Show.
All right, let's go ahead and get started with some comments from last week's show. And first up is Wicked Works, to Wicked. It's to Wicked.
Yeah, okay. This is Wicked Works off of YouTube.
He came up with to Wicked came up with the main topic last week. I
Yes.
said, hey, what should we do for a main topic? And there you go. That was to Wicked.
Says, and just to clarify, the internet.com boom didn't destroy the internet, duh. But most of the companies did die, and it took a while for things to get back to normal.
Yeah, and so last week's topic being, are we in a kind of is the small sat launcher bubble about to burst?
Right.
Right? And so if that happens, this kind of happened earlier in the 80s, I think it was, maybe 90s, where there were a bunch of launches and we're starting to see commercial space take off. And then the market for the satellites just dried up because they didn't need them anymore, and
Right.
the whole kind of commercial market kind of crashed, and those companies went away. And that's probably what will happen if that's the case with the small sat, nanosat, picosat kind of payloads. If that happens to be the case, it's probably the same thing that will happen, is these companies will just go away. Unlike the .com boom, where it was in these huge mega companies that were tied into everything.
Yeah.
And it caused the markets to just crash around them. I don't think we'll see that happen. This industry is too small for that to happen. At least this part of this industry is too small for that to happen. So it simply would be, I think, company like To Wicked said, companies going away, and then some apprehension in the future of the industry of doing things like this.
Right.
So, all right, next up,
That's fair enough. From Stephen Thompson, also off of YouTube.
the tubes.
Right now, if you have a small sat, you can get into space as a secondary payload or kicked out from the space station. If those orbits don't work for you, you can just... So there is a need for at least one dedicated small sat launcher.
Yeah, and yes, probably more than one, right? You probably need a couple so that you can compete, right? Because you don't want to just have...
And just strategically, you want them placed at different areas of the world, right? So if I'm a company in Brazil, I don't want to have to travel all the way to India in order to get my small sat launched, or have to ship it there, or anything along those lines. I would prefer something in the Americas, right? Or I'm just saying, just simply based on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've made travel so cheap and easy across the entire planet now.
Yeah, but if it's my baby, I don't want to have to try and get it all the way across to a completely different continent.
Just check it. Just check it on the
You know what I'm
luggage.
saying?
Just,
You know what I'm saying.
Just check it with the airline.
You also need to be able to launch in the inclination that works for your particular satellite.
Yeah, and that
Right.
makes sense. Like launching from like a Vandenberg here in the U.S. versus a Cape Canaveral, you're going to have a polar launch in Vandenberg or a low Earth orbit launch, geosynchronous, whatever.
Equatorial?
Yeah, exactly. You could do different launches from different places. Now you can have actually any type of launch you want from anywhere. It just takes more fuel to get to whatever you want if you launch from an improper location. So there you go. All right, next up.
All right, it comes from Stuart Woods, also off of YouTube. Goodness,
I think this is a new comment, first time on the show comment.
Stuart, Mr. Stuart. My view is that the small satellite launchers will serve as a foot in the door for new players, just as Falcon 1 did for SpaceX. The fact that SpaceX ditched Falcon 1 when Falcon 9 was flying suggests that they didn't see a big market for that class of rocket.
Maybe. I mean, we really don't know what SpaceX was thinking or why they did that. So maybe, maybe not. I mean, maybe the timing was wrong too, right? I mean, you look at all these small sats and nano sats and picosats and all the things that are generally secondary or even tertiary payloads on these rockets, and there are times when it might make more sense for them to be primary payload.
Right. Well, because Falcon 1 was flying in like 06-ish, right? Like
Yeah,
small
somewhere in
sat,
there. Yeah.
CubeSat. that stuff wasn't really, I mean,
It was,
well, but
but it wasn't.
Right, but
but it
Vax Hedrum
was.
said the CubeSat market is currently about 450 a year, increasing about 10% per year. So if you run those numbers essentially backwards in the same way, it just wasn't that big of a market at that
Sure.
time. So whether or not they saw it as being something that they wanted to do or could do, I mean, you can never predict the future in that
And
way.
SpaceX's
so if you just
ambitions-
look at it and go, cool, that's neat, but how many of these things were really going to fly anyhow? And yeah, you're right. Their ambitions have been fairly clearly stated of getting to Mars and getting humans to Mars, and that doesn't necessarily always include the small sat.
Yeah, and Vax brings up questions. You didn't get to watch like the show, but did we talk about the current small sat launch backlog? No, because it's
No.
more of a will this bubble burst? And I
Right.
think the idea being is once we get through launching everything, then what? Is there enough demand to meet?
And will there continue to be enough demand?
You're right, to meet the supply levels inside of the industry, because we're seeing more and more of these launchers spin up, which means we're going to be able to take more and more of them up, and we're probably going to be able to take up more as these launchers come online. We may be able to take more up than the 10% growth year over year,
Right.
which means some of these companies just simply will not survive. It's impossible for us to have that many launchers. So, all right, next up.
From U5KO, also off of YouTube. I hate to be a buzzkill, but I can't bring myself to care about micro launchers. I simply don't see how they could ever have any implications beyond low Earth orbit. This is far from the frontier and may as well just be taking up or talking about weather balloons.
No, I disagree. So low Earth orbit
goodness.
is important as well. Just because we've done it for a long time doesn't mean that A, it's easy, or B, there isn't cool stuff that we can do there. Right? Let me equate
Well,
that.
we even talked about the small sats learning from each other and being able to communicate and
Skynet.
Right, exactly.
But think about the cell phone market. Before the iPhone
right
came
into
along,
that.
you had, or smartphone market, you
Sure.
had the Palm Pre and the Trios and the,
Right.
right? And they all sucked. They really sucked, and they were awful. But we had smartphones forever prior to that. Forever, right? I mean, for a really long time
was
prior
a
to that.
while.
And then we started seeing some innovation in that market space, and we started getting like the iPhone and the Android phones and yeah, those two. I was gonna say Windows Mobile, but whatever. So and you see the and the I just figured just jab. No good reason to jab Windows Mobile. It was fun. But now, I mean, now look at your phones. They're truly amazing and remarkable. But back in the day, you couldn't imagine anything that was awesome and awe-inspiring. Well, I could make the same argument for low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit's kind of like the smartphone era of yesterday, the Palm Pre and the Trio, where we haven't figured that out. We haven't cracked that nut. We haven't done that thing that makes it just really freaking awesome. And when we do, it's going to be like that huge shift from that to an iPhone. And so it doesn't seem exciting right now today, but it can be and it will be.
Right.
Even with these small sats, these nano and pico launchers, we can do some really cool things, be it with internet access, communication, imagery. Imagine live real-time imagery video of the entire Earth streaming 24/7. You can zoom into whatever area you want. That's getting. I mean,
So
it
instead of
hasn't-
watching the webcams of Patricia, you can see it from space.
Yeah, sure, but you could actually be able to zoom in and out, and I mean, there's some really cool things you can do from lower altitudes, or even higher altitudes, as long as you have a lot of them, and you don't need these huge vehicles that are spacecraft that we're using today. All right, next up.
All right, you're done with that one.
Everyone gets it. I made
know.
my point, and whether they agree or disagree, they get my point.
This one comes from Horn and Hoof Records off of Twitter.
Horn and Hoof Records.
Exactly.
It's fun to say that.
Hashtag TMRO, hashtag TMROCon needs to happen.
So I said that in jest, the TomorrowCon, the Con of Tomorrow, at like Epcot or something like that.
Right.
It'd be fun. I think we need to be bigger before we can do it. We just passed, by the way, congratulations to the community of tomorrow. When we moved from the Space Vidcast YouTube channel over to the TMRO YouTube channel, we started from
We
zero.
lost like everybody.
We lost everyone. We started from zero. So we went from 20,000 subscribers to 0 subscribers. And we've just now crossed the 5,000 subscriber mark. So congratulations, community of tomorrow. We've made it back up 1/4 of where we were before. Now, I'm sure a lot of those were like bots and other weird things that don't
It was
actually
a good
count.
culling. calling.
Yeah, good calling. Yeah, you are the chosen few, as it were. By the way, if you're watching the show and you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe. That subscription helps us. Helps us with advertising revenue and everything else, and showing that we're
Legit.
legit. So yeah, YouTube likes to see those numbers. So yeah, I think we need to be bigger before we do a con of tomorrow. If you guys disagree, and if we can get like 100 or 200 people to get together, then I think it makes sense. Yeah, see, that number's too big. The number's too big.
Challenge accepted.
I don't think there are 100 or 200 people that would get together for something like that. So,
Yeah, because there's not like 100 people watching the show live right now.
Oh,
at
you know,
all.
there might be.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's. Look at that.
Yeah, that was exactly my point.
But no,
I'm so
no.
glad you picked up on that.
But what I'm saying is, would they all be willing to travel to Florida?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think
That
so.
I
I
don't
bet it'd
know.
be 1% of this whole list. So I bet it'd be like
Well, willing or able. Those are two different things.
irrelevant. They are. I mean, they're two different things. But would they go to Florida, whether they're willing or able?
Just saying.
All right. And finally, we're done with this. And finally,
This one comes from Sarah Hill, also off of Twitter. Is it a tradition now to get mad at Dutta in every episode?
yes, because in every episode he screws something up.
Says the man who screwed up first.
That's irrelevant. And so we only get mad at Dutta
No,
when,
how
not if, but
Dutta
when.
doesn't get mad at Ben when he screws up.
He's screwing up my show.
Note how Dutta does not get mad at Ben.
You don't know.
Yes,
You
I
don't
do
know.
because I know Dutta.
No, he's throwing
Yeah,
up his
no.
arms. He's like, oh,
No,
Ben,
he's
oh,
not.
he did screwed up
He's
again.
so not.
See? Look, he's mad. You can tell.
Look
You
how
can tell.
upset he is.
Look how upset
That poor man.
Look at that. You
How
can tell.
does
you can tell.
he do it? I don't even. Day
tell.
after day, week after week. It's a good thing we pay him because otherwise he wouldn't stick around.
Seriously.
He's
Yeah,
laughing.
no. We only give him trouble when he screws up the show and wipes to black or does something. He did that last year. He didn't wipe to black. He did a DVE, a digital video effect, where he did that.
Yes.
He did that, but to black.
It's very Star Wars.
Which is why I said, and I quote, Dutta, which he will get anytime he screws up the outgoing part of the show. On that note, let's see how he takes us out of this particular show. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. After Dark is up next. If you're a Patreon Plus subscriber or higher, that's available on demand as soon as we're done, as soon as it's posted at least. For everyone else, it'll be available in about 4 weeks. Now, just as a housekeeping note, I said I wasn't going to do it this episode, but I'm going to.
I'm seeing this now.
2 weeks from now, on November 5th, I think it is, 6th, 7th? November
it's
7th. There we go. I had to go the other direction. On November 7th, there will be no show. So we have one more show and then no show on November 7th. And as we start getting towards the end of the year, quite frankly, the shows are going to get a little bit more sporadic. You may like show 1 week, not the next week, on and off. So check our Twitter account over at twitter.com/TMRO for our show schedule and whether we live that particular week. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Well, he dissolved out. Decided to dissolve out this week. It was a good dissolve. I'm happy that we dissolved out.
I pushed buttons.